All right, ladies and gents, I want to read a short story out of Val's House of Musings. And it's just in time for Father's Day because I wrote this little short story using the five senses as sort of an exercise initially, but it ended up being one of the most amazing little pieces I've ever done. Not only about how I grew up, how Winter Garden used to be, but also what it was like, those stolen moments that I remember as a kid with my dad. This was first published in Work of Hearts magazine. It's called In Memory of the Orange Groves. So without further ado, this one's for you, Dad. You want to go to work with Daddy today? They were the words I adored most from my father while growing up in Central Florida. I nodded eagerly, keeping my lips tight since my mother and young sister were usually asleep this early in the morning. Go on then, he smiled, opening the front door. Get your butt in the truck. Getting into my dad's truck was like climbing a metallic golden mountain named Dodge. My father was a mechanic for a certified fruit company, and it was normal for him to have to go deep into the groves to work on tractors and equipment on the weekend. My family had a history of working for the business, all of us living on the same street. I was the sixth generation there, and the houses rented out to them were in front of the actual mechanic's shop. Sadly, it's all gone now. The whole ride was filled with orange groves on both sides of the road with the occasional house. However, today you'll find nothing but subdivisions and businesses. Not all of them were the orange groves my father worked in, but I remember watching the passing trees. The rows were hypnotic as gaps opened and closed at various angles. If the orange blossoms were in bloom and the weather nice, we would ride with the windows down. The smell was a bittersweet fragrance so thick in the air that even on exhale it seemed to be full of the scent. I used to count the sharp 90-degree turns. 1, 2, 3, 5, I think, was the magic number. My smile would leave my cheeks aching as I caught the flashing orange of the clay road on the right. This was where we were headed, and this was my personal favorite grove with my all-time favorite type of orange, Naples. The truck suspension would creak and moan, turning down the clay path. Giggling, I enjoyed bouncing around on that old truck bench seat. To this day, I remember we were going to Hancock Grove area, rightfully named after the lake. If you go there today, you'll see very little of where I used to run and play. The back half of the grove is now a golf course, while the front half is a gated multi-million-dollar home development. The once all-natural lake is bejeweled with a man-made beach and skiing buoys. Every time I see it, my heart aches to see the phantoms of the groves I adored so much. The truck rolled to a stop, the dust from the road rolling past in a heavy, sleepy cloud of orange. Sliding off the edge of the seat, I landed on my feet, excited. I followed my father close on his heels to see what task had been set before him. Conversation was short and to the point between us, if we even spoke at all the whole time we went out there. Cicadas shrilling, mockingbirds chirping, and the sound of old tractors starting were all music to my ears and worth more than any conversation could have brought me. When it was clear that my father did not need me to be his helper, fetching and holding his tools, I would change my agenda to exploration. The sun was warm and toasty on most days, as expected in Florida. Often, I would come across a wild rabbit, little anole lizards, birds of all colors, and even at times snakes seeking out rats, which often took up residency in the barn. Occasionally I would find a toad, chase him to his hole, and crouch there, growing curious about what his life must be like. crunching sounds often led me to the discovery of a marching green gopher tortoise, the vagabonds who aimlessly wandered the realm of the orange groves. A whistle would interrupt the world. The animals and I would pause to look in the direction it came from. "Valerie?" my father's voice would roar. "Where you at, girl?" Running, I'd always managed to pop up from behind him in an instant. His smile under his bushy mustache was wide, expressing his enjoyment of my adventures as I stood there, red-cheeked and beaming. There was no denying he knew how much I loved nature and being out there with him. In the usual routine there at Hancock, he would open the passenger side door of the truck, and obediently I would climb back in my spot. As he came around to his side, he'd magically have an orange for me. Sometimes he'd hand it to me, other times he'd take the moment to peel back the top half like an apple and poke a hole in it so I could squeeze and suckle the juice from it. "Want to do some fishing before we go home?" He'd ask, and I would nod excitedly. Fishing was my other love. Sorry, misty-eyed. He would start the truck and go deeper through the grove, working our way to the edge of the lake. The road was right along its side. Often I wondered if he hit a bump hard enough, would we tumble down into the lake? Stopping, my dad would clear out a spot for fishing just for the sole purpose of providing me a safe spot. He would set up my fishing pole, handing it over to me, not caring that it was sticky with orange juice. It was my pole, and he left me to do what I had been taught to do. My shoots would make a sucking and squishy sounds if I got too close to the water's edge. Squinting, I would look for the lily pad to toss my line next to in hopes of luring a fish out. Ironically, I don't ever recall catching much out of that lake, but we spent hours there. Turtles would pop their heads out of the water, curious as to what we were doing. Waterfowl often filled the far edges of the lake. Ducks swam in the shade of a tree, and sometimes a blue heron would join our side. If I was lucky, my floating bobber would hop, dipping in and out of the water for a second. My grip would tighten as I mouthed to the fish, "Get it? Take it." Under the water, it would go and stay. My heart thumping in my ears, I would jerk up on my pole. The tugging and bending of the tip of my rod would confirm I had fish on the hook. Reeling the fish in, fighting the constant pulls and tugs, I would bring in the prize of my patience. Often we would catch Florida panfish of all kinds, bluegills with their turquoise-toned sides, shellcrackers with their spots bordered in red and orange, and even specks with spots and opalescent gray scales. It was always sad when we finally had to give up, often from the rumbling of an afternoon thunderstorm and incoming dark clouds. The water would turn choppy and angry in an instant, forcing us to pack up. Climbing back in the truck, we both would sit in there, sighing and not wanting to leave the peacefulness of the grove that brought to both of us. I think the last time I ever went out there was after I saw them clearing half the grove to make way for houses. After that, I could not bear to ruin my memories of the orange groves that made up most of my childhood. Sorry, this one gets me every time. So that's an example of some of the short stories in this, but happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, and especially you, Dad. This one was written with you in mind. Love you guys.